Welcome back. This is Good Morning Kenya. Remember, you can keep talking to us via our communication platforms. On Twitter, the hashtag is Good Morning Kenya. At KBC Television is our official station handle. My handle is Jane Wamboi, and our SMS line is 20154. Do leave a name and location. We'd love to know where it is you are watching us from this morning. Now, right now, we want to just switch gears and go to matters concerning the media personalities and the media industry as a whole, and just try and look at how we report these days. This discussion is all about media reporting and, of course, the public perception and what goes into all this. And to help me with this discussion, I have two gents with me in studio. I'll start with the one to my immediate left. He is Victor Bwire, who is the head of media development and strategy at the Media Council of Kenya. He will be sharing his input in regards to this discussion. Thank you so much for being with us.
Asante.
And to the extreme left, we have Wilfred Marube, who is the chair of the Public Relations Society of Kenya. Karibu sana.
Thank you, Jen.
He's also going to be sharing, his bit in regards to this discussion. And of course, you can be part of this discussion via the communication platforms that I have just issued. So let's just get straight into it. Now, we had started this discussion a while back, but we were focusing on, we narrowed in on political reporting. But now so much has been happening to a point where it has been termed as Githeri media, because of everything that is happening. But let's just quickly look at how the state of media reporting as of now, and the biggest issue or the first issue that comes to mind is the whole aspect of editorial independence. Let me hear from you, Bwire. When you talk about editorial independence, what even do we mean for the benefit of our viewer?
Thank you, Jen. Pleasure once more. Nice topic. While across our journalism schools and discussion editorial conferences, we have talked about the issue of editorial independence.
Yeah.
And if you look at even Article 34 of the Kenya Constitution, when they were creating, for example, the Media Council of Kenya, they say, check Article 35, 33, 34, and 35. They bring out the issue of media independence. And what they discuss here is either proprietorial independence, interference.
Yes.
We need to protect media from owners, as it were. That's why it's called proprietorial interference.
From the media owners themselves.
The investors, who, as we notice, one of them do not invest in media because of the public good, but as a business. So, two, there's the issue of government interference.
Yes.
And in many times, it might not be limited to Kenya, government have interfered with the media operations globally. Look at what is happening in Tanzania, for example. So you have been in Rwanda, you are aware. And in Kenya, some instances where government, while it was so pronounced during the Kanu times, but even today, there are incidences. And it might not be directly the dealing with the content, but in other manners.
Other aspects.
And then obviously there's the commercial independence that advertisers, and you mentioned them all the time. At one time we were talking about corporate terrorism, where some advertisers, given the money they give to media, and remember, media largely depend on advertising revenue. So there are quite a number of big corporates who give adverts to media houses, who you rarely see a story
about them,
and a balanced story. So that's the independence that is talked about, and we are taught all the time that journalists per se need to guard against proprietorial, government, and commercial. But there are also the independence of, if you are born a Christian, for example, is your religious belief influencing the manner in which you are reporting to the extent that you are unfair to other religions? If you are born a lady, for example, are you influenced so much by your gender to this level that you are also being unfair to others? So geographical, education, when we are now seeing a lot of our journalists, for example, moving away from middle class to upper class, and we have talked about gurus and what, is this interfering with the way we look at the work we do? So in the newsroom, how do you determine the content that you churn out there, that you give out? It's a difficult concept. It's not something that you'll achieve, but there are indicators of how, and there are two examples that have been given in this country. There are two radio stations that were owned by one family. One had very strict editorial guidelines. They had agreed with the owner how they will run the station, even in writing, that yes, you are the owner, you are the investor, but matters professional is us, and he never interfered. the radio is still there up to date, doing very well. Now, and another one, the same family, they had no way of relating, and even guests were determined by the owner, and they will check out guests from the studio because the owner is annoyed, then, and that radio station closed down.
Collapsed, yeah.
So that's why we're talking about if investors can give room for professionals to do their work. Yes, you put here your money, yes, but leave the professional. And it happens. We have given examples in hospitals. There are a lot of businessmen who own hospitals, but do they go around telling the doctors who what to inject patients? No. So journalists also need to be allowed to give given room to exercise their professional discretion when they are doing their work. So
Without
that's largely
interference.
what we talk about when we talk about media needs editorial independence to do their work.
All right. Let me hear from you, Wilfred. When you talk about editorial independence, just from what you say, this example, it's something that has actually happened. But your thoughts when it comes to, editorial independence and where do we stand?
It's a very interesting area, as Victor said. And for me, when I talk about editorial independence, I talk from the point of view of a consumer of media, a user of media, and sometimes a critic on how media has failed to perform or has performed its duties very well. An independent media or editorial independence is actually a boon to the organizations, be it government, be it business organizations, be it non-profit organizations. Because editorial independence means that you are going to focus on what matters most for the public interest. But again, it becomes a difficult concept in that there are so many interests interwoven within editorial independence. So sometimes we refer to it as a misnomer. That's a question we would perhaps ask, is there something called editorial independence? And then the answer perhaps would be no, because at the end of the day, there are a lot of so many interests to be balanced, as Victor said. They are the owner's interests, basically who are investors and they need a return on investment. They are also the political and ideological persuasion of the editors themselves.
Yeah.
And also in looking at the news production process, then we also have the reporters on how they perceive and they report the news and everything else. But what is more worrying are the commercial interests. For me, the biggest threat to editorial independence is not even government. It's actually commercial interests. Because at the end of the day, most newsrooms must pay salaries. They must get a return on the investment. And for them to be able to do that, I think what probably they need to look at is how do they curtail or manage the commercial interests. Because I believe or I imagine that most of the decisions in the newsroom are mostly not driven, but their considerations, commercial considerations. So that even if there's a public interest aspect that needs to be reported, sometimes it's weighed against what is the opportunity cost. And I think that is something that media houses probably are working, and I think I need to say that they are doing very well, that despite all that pressure, because commercial interests have a lot of pressure, we could say there is a semblance of editorial independence in most of the media houses in Kenya. And I think that's something probably that is tough. And for us as users and consumers of media, of media products, I think editorial independence is good for organizations. It makes a positive story go out. It makes people perceive organizations in a different light because media is perceived to be independent.
All right. Now, the media in itself is supposed to inform, to educate, and to entertain. And it also shapes the perception of the public as a whole and sets the agenda. When it comes to prioritizing on what should be important for the nation, how are we faring in this regard, and especially to how even the public perceives all this information that is put out there? Because just in light of what we have been seeing in the recent past, the whole issue of cancer, it has come into the public light quite loudly in recent time. But this has been an issue that has ravaged the country. It has been happening for so long. But are we really doing the right job in terms of setting the agenda and redirecting, our priorities as a country?
Thank you. While I'm a reader in media-related issues, though I'm a practitioner, is that we also need to appreciate that starting with the all-powerful theories of the media, the bullets, the spermidonic syringe, studies were done, and it's established media is not all that all-powerful tool. People have different sources of information. Media is just one of the many sources of people get. But even going away from that, I think if you look at, in fact, in the media monitoring department where I work at the Media Council, we have just commissioned a study to look at how media has covered the cancer issues. And there's quite an amount of stories that media have done on cancer-related stories. If it were that media shapes the opinion or people listen to media, then this special fund for cancer, this big hospital for cancer patients would have been built, or a special fund. I mean, I was looking at Honorable Mohammed Ali, the Nyali MP, talking about in Parliament, and he passionately talked about, and media showed that thing live, including KBC, on the need. I've seen editorials by Nation Standards, People, Star, talking about this. So if people are listening, and people, because it's quick when something happened, they say media, their media has not been covering this, but factual evidence is there. Today in the morning we're checking our media monitoring system, and quite a bunch of stories on these issues. Just that who listens, who picks some of these things.
So what does that say about the public perception now on the other side of the divide?
That's what I'm saying, that at some stage people sometimes go for media simply for don't even information. And big time, our media is becoming an entertainment source. People sometimes go for betting and related, and studies have just been released. How many people go to for media to get information on news? A very little number. I mean, and that's why we need to ask ourselves, because many times, if you look at 2007, 2008, the post-election violence, when media came and for example, all the 4 media newspapers at that time had a page 1 commentary on why we need peace in Kenya at that time. Remember, towards the end of how that hostilities, I mean, people listened, and quite a number, I've seen quite editorial. So the thing is that we can't get tired, we must write and write about these issues. I was seeing Mohammed yesterday tweeting about the latest studies by the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics on who is the leading killer in Kenya. I mean, I think cancer came number 2, malaria was number 1, and then the other thing. So there are also other sicknesses. Today we have lost, sorry that we have lost our governor. The other day, 3 days ago, we lost Honorable Ken. And it becomes very emotional, and everybody's talking about it. Once we are done with it, people forget and say they go to move to the next. So that sporadic approach to dealing with things sometimes gets other national priorities get lost in the discussion. That we are very emotional and sporadic in terms of the way we approach something. Tomorrow there will be, for example, a road accident, then we move away. We go and say now it's road accidents that are leading killers. We forget. So we need to sustain a discussion. Even journalists, we have journalists who have, I mean, right now we have just, you are aware we are fundraising for Carol Lagosia's mom. I mean, it's the same thing we are talking about. So I think we need to engage in a way, one time where, for example, all media houses, and sometimes we talk about media in Kenya. Do you have Kenya media or do we have media in Kenya? Because again, there's that competition. I see people talking about media in Kenya, but where I see it, I see a lot of competition. There's no where editors sit and say, we'll treat this thing the same way. Each of you are in competition. So, but we are saying consistency. For example, Nation, and now I know KBC has a session on health reporting. How do we prioritize? Because ICP, where we have created desks specifically for health reporting, but again, the reporting is not about the diseases. It's about the corporates in health sector. So we're talking about so much who is investing in what, so that what is the content that we need to get, even as we set aside specific programs on health, on cancer, and the rest. So that it's not just about the materials. But you see, like today, Nation has a pull-out on how many people, though, again, they have only picked the big people in the society, but they have shown at least a number. There are quite a number, I mean, of people there even who can't make it to the media, who are dying of hunger. So again, commissioning stories. KBC, you have the network. You have correspondents in all the 47 counties. If you just did a whole week of stories on cancer, for example, with stories from the counties, I am sure it will have a huge impact, and it will make people start thinking. Because even when we are talking about parliament, I remember a story on Standard saying 63 members of parliament are being treated of cancer outside. That's a huge number, a big number. Now, those are just MPs who can make it. How many other Kenyans? Yeah, so I think we have not lost it. Media has done the best it can, obviously because of the other interests we have mentioned, but we can't lose hope. We can't give up. We must continuously talk about these issues so that one day, one time, we know something will be done.
All right. I'd also like to hear from you in regards to the same point, about priorities and perceptions of the public in regards to what we put out there. Is it always, the media is not doing enough or the right thing or focusing on the right thing, or also the public perception really plays a heavy role in how they interpret these stories?
Thanks, Jen.
And how fast we forget.
Just to echo, or maybe to disagree with what Victor says, media is still a very powerful and credible source of information in this country, especially when you talk about television and radio. There are so many people whose worldview, whose information source is mainly radio, especially when they want credible. Of course, we know there's been an explosion of social media as another source of information, but media is still the leading credible source of information. Having said that, and the way I see it, the problem is what Victor said, that media media houses are unable to sustain conversations. They are doing very well in terms of informing us. As you said, media's role is to inform, entertain, and educate. But apart from that, the main important role of media is supposed to facilitate dialogue, bring different stakeholders together into this media platform, and they facilitate dialogue. And looking at the case right now we have is a cancer, we call it a tragedy in Kenya. And there have been calls that the government needs to declare it a national disaster. The national disaster. But before that, the question is, media has been done very well in highlighting the suffering of prominent and opinion shapers in society. What about the faceless and nameless ones? And that's where most of the suffering is. And most of these people cannot even afford to place even an obituary in a newspaper, so that we're able to know what the statistics are. And I think it is the responsibility for media houses to define the agenda, sustain it, so that there is conversation about how local people and how normal men and women are suffering from cancer. For instance, we're talking about cancer. What are the government interventions? Does government have a cancer policy? If the answer is yes, then what is working in that policy and what's not working in that policy? And what are the success stories? Perhaps there are success stories which we are not aware of. And this one does not just require a one-off reporting. It just requires a sustained dialogue, not even a one-week dialogue. Basically, maybe the challenge is for forward-looking and progressive stations like ABC to basically focus on cancer as a discussion. Because I think the time is ripe. Bring on board the cancer survivors, people suffering from cancer. We're talking about the doctors, they are policymakers, they are health specialists in policy making, so that this conversation can be escalated to a higher level. So the challenge is that we should, in terms of perceptions, what we feel, and especially from as a communication professional, is that media needs to move away from the who and what, and move into the why and how and so what.
All right.
And that's the only way that discussion can be sustained. Okay. So at the end of the day, we're able to see the various aspects of such, what I would say a disaster like cancer, because many people are suffering in a very quiet manner.
Okay.
Yes, and it's very painful.
It is.
Yeah.
And when we talk about cancer, we are using it as an example for the purposes of this discussion, not to say that cancer is the only problem out there. We are only using it for the purposes of this discussion as an example. Now, let's get back to, when it comes to media reporting, and now back to the side of the media. And I want to hear from you, Wilfred, the whole issue of having proper structures that are laid out within a media house that also determine, how operations are done in the media house in itself, that also, issues to do with editorial independence cannot become an issue. When it comes to structures, from where you stand, are there proper standing structures that actually determine how a media house should be run, from what you have seen in the media houses that we have here in Kenya?
Thanks, Jen. And for me, as I said, I would say that as a critic, as a user, and as a consumer of media services. From where I see it, I think there are structures, there are physical structures.
But they...
or functional structures within media houses. You can say there's this department, there's this role. But understanding how media works, there's a lot of subjectivity. When you talk about editorial independence, it's about how do you perceive the issues? What do you think is the most important issue for the day? What do you think Kenyans need to know? And I think it's therein when there's that aspect of subjectivity, of individual decisions. Because the question is that there are so many things happening, but how do you determine that this is the best way that, this is the best event or news that I want to report today? This is how to best frame it, because when it talks about framing of issues or framing of news, it's actually it's a question of now subjectivity, so that you find that the structures are there, but in terms of individual capacity, in terms of individual decisions, in terms of individual ideologies, what are people's beliefs? What are their political orientations? Though we know they're not supposed to interfere with reporting. What are their religious affiliations? What are their personal values? These are some of those factors that come into play before what we see as news, basically what we consume as news, comes forth. We know that there are code of ethics. We know that because Victor is basically the organization he works for, promotes the code of ethics. Because the code of ethics basically suggests that we understand that you have your own subjective way of doing this, of judging what is of news value. But can you do this in terms of, can you maintain objectivity? Are you able to provide balance? And I think that's where the challenge is, in terms of enforcing, interpreting, and also probably integrating the code of ethics, that's the journalistic code of ethics and standards into the reporting. I think that's where the challenge ought to be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you agree with his thoughts on, in terms of, these systems are there, but are they being adhered to in-house?
There are challenges which we have observed. One of the issues, Doc, that we are getting a problem, while the code of ethics is there and is part of the Media Council Act 2013, Schedule 2 actually is part of the law. But one, there are only a few colleges that include the code of ethics in their training.
So the problem
Most
is
of the
deeper.
time, we teach media law and call it ethics.
Ethics, media ethics.
So media ethics, and I did the same. But I look at the media ethics, my notes I read in class was purely about defamation, truth, I mean purely law. Yet the code of ethics as provided for in the act is different. A few things. So one, in colleges, we call the course media ethics, but we never teach the code of ethics. That's a gap. Now, how do we employ? Most of our employment in media houses is through a phone. You are so and so in Turkana and start reporting for us from there. It's a very informal way of how people are employed to start working for media houses. Now, there's no proper orientation. Save for a few media houses, I know 5. A number of media houses, even when they have their own internal guidelines and editorial ethics, they never do orientation for their staff on what their own editorial is about. So you see there's already a gap. Then now 3, Media Council starts monitoring and checking journalists against their adherence to a code of ethics that 1, they were never taught in class, 2, they have not been exposed to even in their media house. So there's a huge gap. So Media Council then starts now to do again training on code of ethics, which largely is not our core issue to do. We are a regulator, but now we spend a lot of our time now teaching code of ethics. Now, with the nearly 5,000 accredited journalists in the country and with the resources out there, sometimes it becomes a gap in terms of reaching out. So we are doing the much we can, but there are a number of people, senior, I go and show them a code of ethics. Have you ever seen this? They have never seen. So you see there's a huge gap, which then also tells you that even where we have internal guidelines and the issue of employing people on phone in a very informal manner, because when you write a contract, you can be given these are now the do's and don'ts for this KBC. But when most of our people are employed through on phone and they start working without even, they have never even visited here and they are employees for 6 years, it gets a very good, what does KBC stand for? You ask some journalists who work here, they don't know. Not because but they have never been exposed. The orientation structures in most of our media houses are so poor and so weak that, so that already also creates a lot of problems. A number of people are employed, in journalism against like EPL. People are employed without, you are just called Jen, you report, and then you disappear here, you are in KBC tomorrow, you are in KTN. So sometimes, and people come with at a very senior position. Now, HR departments are also sometimes they're intimidated into calling a number of people who have been to do orientation for them. So we have people who are in senior position and other places, but they are never even sure of the editorial policy of a media they work for. So that creates some loophole in the sense of people understanding what the media house they work for. So now that creates its own structures. But more importantly is, like Doc said, what are the structures we are talking about? Editorial independence. When we have out of the, say, 179 radio stations I'm mentioning, you will get 80 or 90% is a one-man, one-woman show in terms of he's the station manager, he's the news editor, he's the everything.
Presenter.
And he's the presenter. So such people, again, following even the code is not there. It's not an option. They even don't know. Some of them, many of them actually are not journalists because Media Council accredits journalists. But who accredits the station managers and the other media? Because principally they are not journalists, but these are the people who run these media houses. So that creates a whole problem in the sense that the people who are now in top management in some of the media houses are not journalists, have never been exposed to journalism, so they have got nothing to do about even those code of ethics we are talking about. Them, like now, I have seen a number of radio stations because they are suffering in terms of income. They are sending a journalist in your contract. Very weird. In a journalist contract, you have been given a journalist to be bringing stories and also bringing adverts. So you go to KPA or you go to Marube.
You're a marketer and a content generator.
So now how does that person behave when he's the salesperson and a journalist at the same time? And they're being pushed. You know, it's so sad. Now, such things now force journalists sometimes to ignore their code of ethics to look for, because they've been told if you don't bring 30%, you will be sacked. Yes. As a salesperson, not a journalist, you know. So those are things that we must help. And in one of, sorry to divert a bit, but next week we are having a media forum, the media summit by the Media Council at Intercon. And one of the big sessions we are organizing is the issue of media sustainability and professionalism. That how do people manage a media in a sustainable way, but at the same time professionally. Because we are talking about content being a king. That's something we use. Yeah. But it must be professional content. It can't just be content that is useless. So in that program, and we have brought people from the community radio, from the big media houses like KBC will be there. In fact, Dr. Naim Bilal will be one of the panelists to share with us. And we have brought guys from South Africa and Germany to see what are these media models, business model, because we cannot continue running media houses as factories in the 1972 models. Things have changed. We must adopt new mechanisms. And look at people like Guardian, the issue of subscription and paywalls. We must start change. We can never, media can no longer depend on advertising as the only source of income and at the same time talk about professional content. So these are discussions people are holding that if we are going to maintain professional content to be the king, then, because remember, KBC became Mama and Baba at Taifa, not because of adverts, because of the content you are carrying at that time, and any other. So content, the discussion about 60% to 40%. Media house must have 60% editorial professional content, and if it's adverts, it should be 40%. It can't be the other, because most of us, you hear even a radio station telling you, and our news is sponsored by so-and-so. How do you allow your news to be sponsored? I mean that's weird. So it's unprofessional. I mean, it's unheard of. News is the only independent, proud thing you can be proud of. How do you allow it to be sponsored by somebody else? Even if you are looking for money. We are going to stations outside Nairobi where even programs like these that are supposed to be free, people are being charged. That we could have charged you 120, but just make 50,000. And yet these are purely editorial programs. So once that is done, then we have lost it. So a lot of thinking needs to be done. In one of the partnerships now we are developing with the Capital Markets Authority, is to help media houses, one, the smaller ones, to change their business operation, two, to even list at Nairobi Stock Exchange so that more people can buy shares in those things. It can no longer be a family business. If you have started a big business is doing well, why can't you make it a professional thing by registering at the Nairobi Stock so that people invest in? Okay. That's the idea that we must change the way we are running media houses. We must put structure. Other than the 5 media houses I've told you, we walk around this media. You go a radio station that has no, even local, there's nothing. It's just there. It's a news house. But who manages? Where are the structures? Who reports to who? Who is responsible for what? It's not there. So we need to help media houses to have structures of decision making, running. Look at the stories that come out on Monday in most, especially newspapers, and even broadcasting. The front page. People know on Sundays most of the editors are off. So people bring all their weird stories, their Waganga stories, the weird. So Monday stories, you see one person has 10 stories. You see this, anyway.
Okay, so, thank Jen. Yes. There's something which Victor has mentioned, which we should not lose, and I think is the issue of ethics. And ethics not only affects the media sector, it actually affects the entire...
Cuts across board.
The entire ecosystem, the media ecosystem. That means we're talking about public relations practitioners, communication managers, the advertising industry. And I think ethics, in as much as we demand for ethical conduct, and the way it's so difficult to enforce professional code of ethics among journalists, I think this is the same challenge that people like us at Public Relations Society of Kenya, we engage. Because we have so many practitioners who do not follow the code of ethics. And I think this one also affects the nature of reporting. Because remember, the media houses have news sources. And these news sources, most of the time, are the communication managers or the public relations managers. So if they do not engage in ethical conduct, that one is also going to interfere with the editorial independence. So I think when you talk about media ethics, we've got to broaden this particular concept and look at within the entire media ecosystem. Because how ethical are the news sources? And I think that is something for us we really focus on, that news sources don't need probably to spin. They need to deal with facts. They don't need to have undue influence, editorial influence over publishing their stories. And it's actually a very, probably, it's a hot topic and very broad that maybe we should have a discussion sometime, because ethics actually is the main thing. And you cannot just talk about media ethics in the journalist space. It has got the other space of the other actors like us.
The whole scope.
Yeah. And the discussion our colleague Moses Nyandika likes bringing up. Look at even the government, not just government, even corporates. People are going for shortcuts. They want the consultants and whoever, because they don't care about ethics. They will not go through the formal communication channels where if they bring it to Moses, I mean to Dr. Marube here as the head of communication, he will ask, and why about this? They want the brokers. Who is it? So every ministry has now, they listen more to the consultants, more to the established channels, because these are guys who will say, so long as we have some little money here, the story will get out. So we are running away from, so it starts from the sources, the consultants, the whole chain.
The whole chain, the ecosystem itself.
We must ask ourselves hard questions. Because journalism ethics, like you said, if we limit it to media, you can be ethical. But if you are dealing with unethical colleagues in the sales department, in the sources,
it will affect you and your work.
So there's something we must ask ourselves as we talk about. Does the PR colleagues observe ethics? Do other communication experts, do media, the journalists, do the sources? I mean, within the code of ethics, even for civil service, does it allow you to do all the things you are doing? We are pushing this debate even to political parties. Do your members, are they ethical in what they are doing? Because we will not have reached where we are, you know, in the sense of what we are getting largely in our media and what is the actual sense, simply because people don't respect ethics.
So structures are a very big problem. And, you know, all we are saying is just a manifestation of where the problem really lies. And we need to address the source so it can address all these challenges. Now, you have mentioned the whole issue of, you know, ethics and how journalists operate. Some operate just because you have to operate, you know, ethics aside. And that brings to the whole issue of accreditation. Let me hear from you, Bro. What goes into the accreditation process of the journalists?
I think this is a major thing, and unfortunately something we need to talk about. Accreditation of journalists is provided for in the Act. The Media Council Act, Section 6, and subsequent. And one thing I find journalists amuse me with is that while accreditation is a legal requirement, for you to practice as a journalist in Kenya, you need to be accredited. When you ask a journalist to accredit, he starts saying, so if I accredit, what will I get? I don't come for seminars, I don't come for your workshops. Accreditation is not a favor you are doing to me or to Media Council, or it's not a buying you space to go to workshops. Accreditation is a legal requirement, just like in law, just like in medicine, where for you to practice, you must have this document. Now, whether other things will come is your business. Because in civilized societies, if you don't have an accreditation card, or you are not allowed to any function, principally, it's a criminal offense, impersonation, and all those things. So, and we have arrested actually quite a number of people right now. It's moving there. While we appreciate that a Media Council has no police department and we can't be everywhere to arrest, but we have written to Public Relations Society. We wrote you a letter. Remember, we have written to Parliament. We have written to Judiciary and the Association of Hotel Keepers to tell them to prioritize the issue of accreditation. That a person just coming and saying I'm a journalist does not make them a journalist. A journalist is a profession who has been accredited. One, he must have a accreditation from Media Council. Two, must have an accreditation from the media house. If you are a KBC, you have a staff card. You know, so you can't just say, owning a pen and a recorder and a camera does not make you a journalist. Working in KBC does not make you a journalist, because in the KBC we have media personalities, we have media operatives, and we have journalists. Not all people work here. So we must start separating these things. And the act says, the current act says, for you to be accredited as a journalist, you need to be, for a Kenyan journalist, either you have trained in a recognized university, or you have profiles of work to show that you have been living off as a journalist. Because the 2007 Act was very clear, had said a diploma in journalism. But people say there are people who have accumulated enough experience, have been exposed, and people give examples, quite a number, Leonard Mambo Mbotela, Alice, and others, who are accomplished, but they had never gone through a formal study. So that's why he said, we need to relook at how we accredit journalists. So that's how the law then was in and said, if somebody has a profile, he has worked in a media-related...
Over a certain period of time.
5 years, actually, it's very clear. Then he should be given. And we have qualified in the new accreditation that now we'll be doing accumulation of points. That even as you are a journalist, you will not be automatically accredited simply because you are a journalist. We are now asking the professional growth, that people must also start investing in growing. So that's one thing. Now, the challenge was, we don't have a challenge with journalists, because journalists come and accredit, they have no problem. The people who are giving us problem is the strangers in journalism. The people who come to journalism and they were not journalists, who are giving us reason, and they are there. You know, in journalism, you cannot limit. Creatives are an important part of journalism. We have other colleagues who support our work as journalists, but they work in media houses. Now, they work down there and they call themselves journalists. Yes, they are not journalists. So the thing we have done is we have come up with another accreditation criteria, which will accredit journalists, camera people, videographers, produce, we will separate, so that journalists will have a journalist press card, but the other colleagues, because it's also important, if you are to go to a function, they will ask you, even including your other colleagues, for how are they journalists. I mean,
what's your role?
So we'll give them accreditation, not as journalists, but as media
specific
workers.
To your job description.
So that then we help deal with that issue. The other thing is the colleagues, especially the colleagues who run the talk show, the presenters, and a number of them are not journalists, but they are good in terms of what they are doing. So what is that, it's now a new rule. Nobody will be allowed behind a microphone writing before being exposed, minimum of 6 weeks, to the code of ethics or the practice of journalism. And Media Council will be doing those trainings for all the other colleagues and they will now satisfy them. So that, because a number of complaints actually at the Media Council, 90% of the complaints that come there are from our colleagues, the hosts, and others who are not necessarily journalists. So we are trying to help clean that by acknowledging that media industry cannot be done by only journalists. It's a big industry. But even those, especially who will sit behind a microphone or write, must be exposed to the code of ethics. And it's now a criminal offense, which we have already communicated even to the media house, the media owners, and editors, that if you are going to have people in your media house who are either talk show hosts or moderators who are not exposed, you will take responsibility.
All right. PRSK, your thoughts in regards to this thing?
Okay, I can say Victor is very lucky as a Media Council of Kenya, because they have a law. We have the similar challenges. People masquerading as journalists or as experts. Probably they are doing other roles, but they are not trained for that particular job. And these are similar challenges we're facing as Public Relations Society of Kenya. There are so many people employed in organizations with no basic training in public relations.
And even our leaders, when they have communication
Yes, they have communication advisors who do not understand on how even to craft a simple communication strategy or even a simple communication message, but they are directors of communication. That's a challenge we are facing. And we hope that we have a bill that is at draft stage, which we're engaging with the Ministry of ICT. That is the Draft Institute of Communication, Public Relations and Communication Management Bill. We've already also begun a certification process to find a way that, in as much as we're focusing on the legal process, that is there a way that you could also certify so that people are able to sit for an examination and then they meet the requirements, and then we could now tell the industry, if somebody has this certification from the Public Relations Society of Kenya, now you can trust them to deliver. I think this is a challenge that is live. We don't have a law. We only pray that you have the law that Media Council has. Because with the law, it's very easy to have people comply. But we're moving towards that. It's something that we want to solve. Because at the end of the day, it's about ethics. Anybody who's well trained, anybody who's accredited, is expected to be ethical in their communication. That's what we focus on.
And now those, before I'm being told we're almost out of time, citizen journalism.
There's nothing called citizen journalism.
There is from the public.
You see, and again, that's the argument we have with the colleagues.
Yeah.
We try to define journalists. These are print journalists, these are broadcast journalists, these are
because even we journalists have actually embraced that term.
I mean, there's nothing called citizen journalism.
Yeah.
Journalism is just journalism, a profession that we have trained for. You know, we ask people, there are so many people who repair cars. If you go to Viandani, you get, why don't we call them citizen engineers? I mean, there are a lot of people who solve cases like assistant chiefs on land cases. Why don't we call them citizen lawyers? I mean, we must just stick journalism is just journalism. Those guys who call themselves citizen whatever, let them just do the citizen things they do.
Victor,
it's just
but
journalism.
Victor, citizen journalism is here to stay.
It's not. There's nothing called mobile journalism, citizen journalism.
Okay.
Journalism is just journalists
who
are trained.
All right. I think we'll have to continue with this discussion. We'll have to put a cap on it right there. I'm being told we have to wind up. We have a live coverage that is coming. Maybe my director, you could just let me know again. It's about a war on graft that is happening at the Fairview Hotel. Yes. And Nudi Haji is actually on, so we just want to switch over to the other side. But thank you so much for being part of Good Morning Kenya. Be sure to join us again tomorrow. My name is Jen Wamboy. Do enjoy the rest of your viewing.
Offenses to those supported by criminal networks require countries to foster and strengthen regional and international cooperation in order to combat them.